My child, pause for a moment and listen carefully, because what you are about to hear may explain something that has been quietly unfolding behind the scenes for far longer than you realize. There was a time when someone close to them only knew a small part of your story. They had heard opinions, assumptions, fragments of conversations, and incomplete impressions. They thought they understood who you were. They thought they had already reached a conclusion about you. But recently, something changed. A conversation took place that nobody expected. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not planned. It began with a simple question. And then someone who truly knew the situation decided to speak honestly. For the first time, the full truth about you entered the room. Not the rumors. Not the misunderstandings. Not the version created by fear, distance, or confusion. The truth. The kind of truth that cannot be hidden forever. The kind of truth that makes people stop talking and start thinking. The kind of truth that changes the direction of a story. As those words were spoken, something shifted. The person listening expected to hear the same things they had heard before. They expected another ordinary conversation. They expected confirmation of what they already believed. Instead, they heard something completely different. They learned how much strength you have shown when nobody was watching. They learned about the challenges you faced quietly. They learned about the kindness you offered without asking for recognition. They learned that many of the assumptions surrounding you were never accurate in the first place. And suddenly, the picture they had built in their mind no longer matched reality. That realization was impossible to ignore. The more they listened, the more they began to understand that they had only been seeing a small piece of who you truly are. What surprised them most was not a single detail. It was the pattern. Every new truth seemed to connect with another. Every answer revealed an even deeper understanding. Every missing piece began to fall into place. And as that happened, something unexpected occurred. The conversation stopped being about the past. It started becoming about the future. Because once people discover the truth, they can no longer pretend they do not know it. Once they see clearly, they cannot return to old assumptions. Once understanding arrives, change often follows. The person who heard these things found themselves replaying the conversation long after it ended. Certain sentences remained in their mind. Certain details refused to leave. Certain realizations kept returning. Why had nobody explained this before? Why had they misunderstood so much? How many important things had they overlooked? Questions like these continued to grow. And with every question came another discovery. The truth about you was far more powerful than they expected. Not because it was shocking. Not because it was unbelievable. But because it was real. Real strength. Real character. Real resilience. The kind of qualities that cannot be manufactured. The kind of qualities that reveal themselves over time. The kind of qualities that leave a lasting impression. As the hours passed, that conversation continued to echo in their thoughts. They began looking at old memories differently. They began revisiting previous assumptions. They began noticing details they had ignored before. And little by little, everything started to change. The remarkable part is that this transformation did not happen because you forced it. You did not chase it. You did not demand it. You did not try to control it. Truth has a way of traveling on its own. Sometimes slowly. Sometimes unexpectedly. But when the right person speaks at the right moment, truth can accomplish what years of explanations never could. That is why this moment matters. Because somewhere beyond what you can currently see, perspectives are shifting. Understanding is growing. And stories that once seemed fixed are beginning to move in a different direction. The conversation may have ended, but its impact has only begun. Subscribe if these messages resonate with you. Super thanks helps $8 support more messages like this. And what happened after that conversation may be even more surprising than the conversation itself. Have you ever wondered what happens after the truth finally reaches the right ears? Not immediately. Not all at once. But slowly, quietly, powerfully. That is exactly what began to happen after that conversation. The person who heard the truth about you could not simply move on with their day. Something about what they learned continued to follow them. Certain words stayed in their thoughts. Certain details refused to disappear. The more they reflected on what they had heard, the more they realized that everything they thought they knew about you was incomplete. What made this moment so important was not only what was said. It was who said it. This was someone they trusted completely. Someone who had no reason to exaggerate. Someone who chose honesty over convenience. And because of that, every sentence carried weight. Every detail felt real. Every revelation forced them to reconsider everything. They began connecting pieces that never made sense before. Situations they once misunderstood suddenly became clear. Reactions they questioned suddenly had meaning. Decisions you made in the past started looking very different through the lens of truth. As the days passed, something even more surprising happened. They started noticing your influence in places where they had never noticed it before. They remembered conversations. They remembered moments. They remembered small acts that once seemed ordinary. But now those moments carried a completely different significance. What once appeared small now appeared meaningful. What once seemed forgettable now seemed unforgettable. The truth had changed the way they viewed everything connected to you. There was one particular realization that affected them more than anything else. They discovered that your character remained consistent even when nobody was watching. That discovery carried enormous weight. Many people can appear impressive when attention is focused on them. Many people can create an image. But very few remain genuine when there is nothing to gain. When they understood this about you, something shifted deep inside their perspective. Respect began replacing uncertainty. Understanding began replacing confusion. Appreciation began replacing doubt. The most remarkable part is that you may not even realize this is happening. While you continue moving forward, while you continue living your life, conversations are creating ripples you cannot see. Truth is reaching places you never expected. Perspectives are changing in rooms you have never entered. People are beginning to understand things they once overlooked. And every new realization adds another layer to a growing story that is far from finished. Then came the moment nobody expected. A new conversation began. This time, they were the one speaking. The same person who had listened so carefully now found themselves sharing what they had learned with someone else. The truth did not stop with them. It continued moving forward. Piece by piece. Word by word. And every person who heard it seemed to arrive at the same conclusion. They had not fully understood who you were until now. That is why this chapter feels different. The momentum is growing. Understanding is expanding. The truth that once remained hidden behind assumptions is now becoming impossible to ignore. What started as a single conversation has become something much larger. And the most fascinating part is that the story is still unfolding. There are still pieces waiting to fall into place. There are still realizations waiting to happen. There are still moments ahead that could change everything. Subscribe if these messages resonate with you. Super thanks helps $8 support more messages like this. And what happened next caused even the people closest to them to stop and reconsider everything they believed about you. A strange thing began happening after the truth started spreading. The people around them were no longer having the same conversations they once had. The energy had changed. The assumptions had changed. Even the questions had changed. Instead of wondering whether the stories they heard about you were accurate, they started asking why nobody had told them the full truth sooner. That question became impossible to ignore. Every answer seemed to reveal another layer. Every layer revealed something even more meaningful. One evening, while reflecting on everything they had learned, they found themselves returning to a memory they had almost forgotten. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Just another ordinary moment. But now, viewed through the lens of truth, it looked completely different. Suddenly they realized that what they once misunderstood was actually one of the clearest examples of your character. They saw patience where they once saw distance. They saw wisdom where they once saw silence. They saw strength where they once saw uncertainty. It was as though an invisible curtain had finally been lifted. The more they thought about it, the more they understood that the truth about you was not built on one dramatic event. It was built on hundreds of small moments that consistently pointed in the same direction. Small acts of kindness. Quiet decisions. Unnoticed sacrifices. Genuine intentions. Things that rarely receive attention in the moment but become unforgettable once seen clearly. And that realization affected them deeply. Because they understood something important. Character is revealed over time. And the truth about your character was becoming impossible to deny. Then came a conversation that nobody expected. Someone asked them directly what they thought about you now. There was a long pause before they answered. Not because they lacked words, but because they were trying to find the right ones. Finally they spoke. And when they did, everyone listening noticed the difference immediately. The uncertainty that once existed in their voice was gone. The hesitation had disappeared. In its place was clarity. Confidence. Conviction. They were no longer speaking from assumptions. They were speaking from understanding. That conversation created another ripple. People listened carefully. Some were surprised. Some were curious. Some were completely caught off guard. But one thing became clear. The narrative surrounding you was changing. Not because anyone forced it to change. Not because anyone argued for it. But because truth has a unique power. When enough people encounter it, perspectives naturally begin to shift. Meanwhile, they continued discovering things they had never noticed before. Certain moments from the past suddenly carried new meaning. Certain decisions you made suddenly made perfect sense. Even situations that once seemed confusing now appeared remarkably clear. It was almost as if they had been looking at a puzzle with missing pieces their entire life, and those missing pieces were finally appearing. The most emotional realization arrived when they understood something very simple. You had remained true to yourself even during moments when nobody recognized your efforts. You continued moving forward even when recognition never came. You continued growing even when others failed to see it. That realization stayed with them longer than any other. Because it revealed something rare. It revealed authenticity. And authenticity leaves a lasting impression. As days turned into weeks, the impact of that original conversation continued growing. More people became aware of the truth. More perspectives shifted. More understanding developed. What began as a single voice speaking honestly had become a chain of realization reaching further than anyone expected. And the most surprising part was that nobody could predict where it would lead next. Because there was still one important piece missing. One final realization. One final moment of understanding. And when that moment arrives, it may become the most important chapter in this entire story. Subscribe if these messages resonate with you. Super thanks helps $8 support more messages like this. The next revelation did not come from a stranger. It came from someone even closer to them, and what they said changed everything once again. What happened next was something nobody could have predicted. The truth had already changed opinions. It had already changed conversations. But now it was about to change something even deeper. Someone very close to them decided to share a perspective they had kept private for a long time. This was not someone speaking from assumptions. This was someone who had quietly observed everything. Someone who had noticed details others missed. Someone who understood far more than anyone realized. The conversation started simply. There were no dramatic introductions. No grand announcements. Just an honest exchange. But within moments, the atmosphere shifted. The person speaking began describing things about you that nobody expected to hear. They talked about your consistency. Your integrity. Your ability to remain true to yourself even during difficult seasons. They described qualities that could not be faked. Qualities that only reveal themselves over time. As those words filled the room, silence followed. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that appears when people suddenly realize they have misunderstood something important. The kind of silence that forces people to think. The kind of silence that changes perspectives forever. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Because what they were hearing did not match the version of the story they had carried for so long. And that is when the biggest realization arrived. The truth about you was not just different from what they expected. It was greater. Much greater. They began understanding that many of your strongest qualities had gone unnoticed because they were not loud. They were not seeking attention. They were not demanding recognition. They simply existed. Quietly. Consistently. Authentically. And now those qualities were finally being recognized by the people who mattered most. One person listening asked a question. If all of this is true, then why did nobody tell us sooner? Nobody had an answer. Because sometimes truth takes time to find its way to the surface. Sometimes people only understand the value of something after seeing the full picture. Sometimes clarity arrives later than expected. But when it arrives, everything changes. That question remained in everyone's thoughts long after the conversation ended. They started revisiting old memories. Revisiting old assumptions. Revisiting moments that once seemed insignificant. And one by one, those memories began telling a different story. A story of strength. A story of growth. A story of someone who remained genuine regardless of circumstances. A story that had been hidden in plain sight. The closer they looked, the more obvious it became. The truth had been there all along. People simply had not recognized it. And now recognition was spreading faster than anyone expected. Every new conversation seemed to reinforce the same conclusion. Every new perspective pointed in the same direction. Every new realization added another piece to an increasingly powerful picture. What shocked them most was how naturally everything fit together once they understood the truth. Confusing moments suddenly made sense. Unanswered questions finally had answers. Unfinished thoughts finally felt complete. And somewhere in the middle of all this, something remarkable happened. Respect grew. Not because anyone requested it. Not because anyone demanded it. But because respect is often the natural response to understanding. The more they learned, the more they respected what they had previously overlooked. The more they understood, the more they appreciated what had been hidden beneath the surface. The more they reflected, the more they realized how much there was still left to discover. That is why this chapter matters. Because it marks the moment when truth stopped being a private realization and became a shared understanding. The moment when people stopped relying on assumptions and started seeing reality. The moment when everything began moving in a new direction. Subscribe if these messages resonate with you. Super thanks helps $8 support more messages like this. And just when everyone thought they finally understood the full truth about you, one final revelation emerged from an unexpected source, and it became the piece that completed the entire story. The final piece of the story arrived when nobody was looking for it. By this point, the truth about you had already traveled further than anyone expected. Conversations had changed. Perspectives had shifted. Understanding had grown. Yet there was still one question that remained unanswered. What would happen now that people finally saw the real picture? The answer came from the most unexpected place. Someone who had been quietly observing everything finally spoke. They had listened to every conversation. They had watched every reaction. They had noticed every change. And after seeing how the truth continued to affect everyone around them, they shared a simple observation. The most remarkable thing about this person is not what people are discovering now. The remarkable thing is that they have always been this way. Those words stopped everyone. Because suddenly they understood something important. The truth had not changed who you were. The truth had changed what people were able to see. You were not becoming someone new. People were finally recognizing who you had been all along. That realization carried enormous weight. It explained why every new discovery felt so natural. It explained why every missing piece fit perfectly into place. It explained why the story became clearer with every conversation. Nothing was being created. Everything was being revealed. And that made all the difference. As this understanding spread, something remarkable happened. People stopped focusing on assumptions and started focusing on facts. They stopped looking at isolated moments and started seeing the entire journey. They stopped judging individual chapters and started understanding the complete story. The more they reflected, the more obvious it became. Your actions had been speaking long before anyone started listening. Your character had been revealing itself long before anyone started noticing. Your consistency had been building a reputation long before anyone realized it. And now all those quiet moments were finally being connected together. One person described it perfectly. They said it felt like reading the final page of a book and suddenly understanding every chapter that came before it. That comparison stayed with everyone. Because it was true. The confusion was disappearing. The missing pieces were appearing. The unanswered questions were finding answers. And the truth that once seemed hidden was now impossible to ignore. For some people, this realization brought surprise. For others, it brought respect. For others, it brought admiration. But for everyone, it brought clarity. The story had changed. Not because reality changed. Because understanding changed. And sometimes that is the most powerful transformation of all. As they looked back on everything that had happened, they realized that one honest conversation had started a chain reaction nobody could have predicted. A single moment of truth had created understanding. Understanding had created perspective. Perspective had created change. That is why this message matters. Because truth has a way of reaching the people who need to hear it. Sometimes later than expected. Sometimes through unexpected voices. Sometimes through conversations nobody planned. But when it arrives, it has the power to transform everything around it. And now, after all the conversations, all the realizations, and all the discoveries, one conclusion remains stronger than ever. The people who finally learned the truth about you no longer see the same story they once saw. They see something much bigger. Something much clearer. Something much more meaningful. And that understanding may become the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Subscribe if these messages resonate with you. Super thanks helps $8 support more messages like this. The truth has finally been spoken. The misunderstanding has finally faded. And the story that follows from here may be the most important one yet.